Well, a huge welcome for being here. When we first did our discovery call and met the first time, I was super excited for this conversation. But I'm very interested in everything you have to speak about the stigma around the phrase man up. Why are you so passionate about the phrase and the problematicness around the phrase man up?
So let's take your audience to the day that everything started happening. It was a July summer evening, and I was in my house helping my 6.5 months old son change. And suddenly something came upon me, and all I knew that I just not feeling well and running short of breath. And I kneeled down, I fell, and I was like, I don't know, maybe having a heart attack. And then I realized that it was such a unique way of your old childhood trauma coming up that I had been sexually abused as a kid. And now I have a son, I'm a father, and I'm his protector, I'm his guardian. What if I can't do that? And what if someone does that to him? So all of that was part of that experience. And to cap that off, I was in a rocky marriage, and contradictory to what a lot of people believe, men are abused too. And I think like there's a lot of that stigma around boys and men growing up, man up, toughen up, boys don't cry. And that actually transforms to the other side of the gender role, just don't throw like a girl, right? Like that itself is pretty insulting, just like any other thing about the boys and men. Women are very good about this, and they're just like biologically and emotionally in tuned about talking and expressing and be there and nurture. And and men are not wired for that. And especially growing up in a society and social structure like this, it's very hard to break that mold, and it's easier to follow that. And that's when I realized that day that when that happened, how everything triggered me back to my childhood and realized like, wow, I mean, this is serious. I realized there's a lot of other men who doesn't have that intellect and have that knowledge to figure out how they want to help their cause, and they want to help their inner child, inner health. When I was going through all this, that dealing, being a new dad, and suddenly discovering the trauma of sexual abuse that I had went through, a rocky marriage, and I was really compensating with alcohol. And the reason for that is when you're reaching for your guy friends, most of them are like, yeah, it's all good. That's just what happens in marriage, and man up, have a drink, or let's go out, let's have a beer. And never got that understanding, never got that space to open up. So then, of course, the next option is counseling. Now, the healthcare system and everything is in such a way, so much against it is the moment you open up that you're feeling depressed or you're feeling like hurting yourself and you're feeling like you're in anxiety mode, there always a repercussion of being held in a inpatient institution or police being called. And that stops a lot of people who are actually suffering and who needs help from opening up even to their therapists. And that's what I learned.
Do you remember the first time that you heard the phrase "man up" or "don't be a crybaby, you throw like a girl"? Do you remember the exact moment you started hearing those phrases?
It's really, really a great question. And it's really funny you asked that question because that's one of my thing in my book that I'm writing, that one of my steps is it's not about the stigma, but you also have to try really hard to get to it. Like when's the first time I heard it? It was 2004 November when my dad passed away, and I was 23 years old. I had to disperse the news to my mom and my sister in the morning at 6:50 a.m. And all my family members basically told me that you're the man of the house. You need to man up. And I didn't get time to grieve. I literally was crying, and I had to walk to a corner. And back then I used to smoke. So I had to take few puffs, and just really kind of had to take a few breaths and wipe my tears and let's man up. And you get into that zone, you get into the autopilot mode, and next thing you're 33, and that's really kind of was the journey that I faced regarding really subduing our emotions.
I'm really sorry to hear that. It's not easy losing a parent, especially a father figure. If your whole mission is around men being more open about their emotions and being willing to take help, you don't even have an example of that anymore.
No, the fact that I am here talking to you and spreading these messages and about him and how it transformed my life and growing up with him and how most of my decisions are made from his principles and how he taught me because he was a teacher and he was a damn good one. And it's always that experience. So of course, I mean, I don't feel like there's always a learning experience in that. I felt that whatever time I got with him. And the problem is nowadays, that's where we keep forgetting is that when we are here, we keep fighting like crazy. We don't want to call our parents or brothers or sisters and I'm guilty of that too. Our spouse, our partners, girlfriends, boyfriends, and kids. But then when they're gone, then we like, oops. So I think that's just part of it. And I get to appreciate that nowadays more at 39, that I still have my mom I get to talk to, and I still wake up and talk to my son and talk to my friends and having on podcasts like this and spreading messages. Yeah, absolutely.
Take me all the way back to you mentioned you went through child sexual abuse.
Hmm.
You mentioned the emotional trauma from that really came out when you had your son and you started helping him. Do you feel that you bottled that up all those years and it started really coming out once you had a little boy?
I'm pretty sure because if you would have asked me back then, did you bottle it up? I wouldn't have any answer for you because I didn't even know.
Oh, you
I
didn't
came out.
remember it, the memories came back.
Hmm.
Oh,
And
wow.
what I learned through that process after that with the counseling and with our like therapist and all that is the trauma stays in your body, and the, there's a way probably I have understood the way it is and kind of shoved it down, not to feel it and be like, I don't want to feel it because that was my coping mechanism back in the day, and I never really addressed that after that because there was no reason for it.
That's really common. I've seen it and heard about it in so many people. You block it out.
Hmm.
And it takes another example like the one that you went through where helping your son get dressed where it brings you right back and the roles reverse.
Hmm.
That's a like you said, you had chest pains, you were out of breath. That's a traumatizing experience.
That
And
is.
the crazy situation is that you have a little boy, like no one's there to help you. So what do
Mhm.
you do in that situation?
What I had to do is I had to first understand like why this is happening. And when I got that, then after that, it was more like, okay, I have two things to do. I have to heal myself first, but at the same time, I also have to make sure I prepare my son so that he has the tools. So I had to get creative because, of course, he's only a baby or a toddler now, 2.5. So what followed after that is bunch of books. It's like I'm a reader to begin with. I mean, if I could show you, it's just all books around here. And I started reading parenting books and logics and how you connect with the toddler, how to talk about difficult conversations and body. I think like we created the culture where we are not talking about body as a biological body to our kids. But the problem is that's where I think majority and the research have shown, and these are the things that I was doing, that you your kids need to understand right and wrong. And as a parent, you can show it, but you have to be a little bit more creative and a little bit more advanced about this. So of course I started implementing few things. I basically taught him his biological parts and what the anatomy of our body. And in that way, he can address if something is wrong. Because and it is a very taboo subject, but I think like this is where parents and adults are making the biggest mistake is they're really kind of babying the babies. Yes, you have to keep them in mind, but it also will help if we are also teaching them what's their boundaries. And there's very easy ways to teach that. And there are help online, there are help everywhere.
I have a friend that has a 2-year-old girl now, and she said to me, she's like, "Janelle, no one teaches you how to be a parent. You actually have no idea what you're doing." So, Rish, having lost your father, there's just such a disconnect where it's like
Mhm.
now you're the father, and I'm sure you think every single day it would be nice to have your father there too, to kind of walk you through this. But yeah, talk to me about some of the books that you've read that have been great parenting, and talk to me about some of the actual tools that you would teach a 2.5-year-old who's barely talking, let alone learning all
Yeah,
these
yeah.
things to protect them.
So one of the best books, and this is what I'm reading right now, it's called The Happiest Kids in the World: How Dutch Parents Help Their Kids by Doing Less. It's amazing. It talks about how you can be in tune with your kids and from kids' perspective. But what I also do a lot with my son is kind of opening up the canvas, not really giving a lot of rules, because this is something saw somewhere on YouTube and or on social media. I think about like 70 or 80% versus 20% no and yes. Like since we start growing up, no's are 80%. Everything is a no, 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 no. And so it hit home when I first heard that. I was like, wow. And it just stuck with me. So that helped because I myself was a rebel as a kid and I experienced and did a lot of things to figure things out myself. And I give that freedom to him to do that, like experience it and explore it. And one of the things that I do in my program, I do Yes Day. And Yes Day it's scary. It's basically anything your kid says that day he wants to do, you gotta do it.
Good luck with that, parents.
Yes, and it's
I
and
don't
of
know if I
course.
would sign on to that day, Rish, if I had a kid.
So here's the thing, right? A couple of my other friends who did this, he has a 9-year-old, and he's like, I was so skeptical attempting to do this. But when I did this, surprisingly, all his daughter asked him that, Dad, I just want to spend time with you by the pool all day. It's as simple as that. You'll be surprised.
Your friend picked the perfect
All right.
day to do the yes
Right.
day. He lucked out. You should tell him you have to do another day.
Yes. And so I'm like, well, you can create different boundaries and be creative about it. But the idea of that is not about what you're giving them. It's about putting yourself as parents beyond that comfort zone that you don't have to control everyday aspect. You can control it because at one point they will start making their own decisions and you cannot just jump in and do this. You can be there as a guardian, as a protector, as a role model, and as like a supporter and cheerleader. And of course, I have to tell them and show them good and bad and right and wrong. And but this whole control thing, that's where it comes down to with the yes days. Like you're kind of training your muscles, you're training your brain, you're training yourself that I can let it go. It's okay. And see what they do.
You talk a lot about control and protecting your kids and just wanting to be a good parent, but as a parent, you're not going to be with them every second of the day.
Hmm.
So, how do you protect them to make them realize that some things that might happen into their lives while you're not around is, 1, wrong, and 2, how do they grow up not resenting you for not protecting them?
That's a very good question. So there are different things. I think teaching, just like we're trying to teach them writing and reading, a lot of visual explanation.
But do
Um,
you have a conversation with them saying, "This could potentially happen to you"? Is that how you start with
no,
a kid?
no, not
Yeah.
really. People think like there's an age to communicate about sexual education. It's not. Moment your kids understands what is what and the physical aspect of it. I feel like, and this is what I'm doing, and I might be completely wrong, and I don't care because that's how I feel like I'm getting the control. So it's all at the end of the day, we're human beings, and if that protects my kid, I'll be the happiest person. If it doesn't, no matter what, I'll at least think I tried. And so I think there's no right and wrong answers to it. Like, do what's best for you. But I openly talk to my kid. He's 2.5. He's very vocal. He can openly talk about who he met and who he talked to, who he played with. So of course he had that. He has that communication. Now there are times he take two and two together and try to make 10. That's a different thing. And you just have to kind of have that understanding that he might do that, but that still is a risk I'm willing to take to protect him from any sort of abuse that I went through. And I think like it's very easy when your kids are vocal just to kind of let them know about their private parts and make sure they understand what is right and wrong. And your parents and just the way we normally kind of explains it while giving bath that Dada and Mama are the only ones and give you a bath and all that. So beyond that, once there's a certain things you cannot cross. So that's where it stands. And as long as they understand, as long as they comprehend, yes. And I think the bigger responsibility is to raise awareness completely on the other side, but that's just an ongoing and huge.
We do what we can do at home first, right?
Like it's just I was just waiting for creating a specific platform and then kind of tackle the next heavy subject about how men not just go through addictions and emotional stuff. Because of this, there are boys are also getting sexually abused, right? So that's also part of it that eventually gonna happen. So yeah.
How old were you? Did you say?
It's funny. I don't remember, but I would say about 6.5. Oh, yeah, I would say 5.5 to 6.5, something like that, or maybe
School
five to
age?
seven. School age, yeah,
Mhm.
for sure.
What do you think your mom, your sister, and your immediate family would say if they knew? I mean, it's been so long. What else do you do besides just hold space
Oh,
for people?
you can't. You really can't. There's not much to say. I mean, I think like next month when I actually open up on my podcast, I might lose some family members. They'll listen to my podcast because I know that for a fact, and I'm okay with it because it's not about me anymore. It's not about them anymore. I made my peace. It's about raising that awareness for our next generation.
How do you make your peace with something like that?
Make
Is
your
it a
peace
forgive
in
and forget or forget and just forget?
I think none of that. And the way I say it is, I'm writing in my book too, like we are taking the world is too much of a binary, right? Binary and non binary. We are too polarized at this point. And I used to be that guy. I used to be that guy. And if
Myself as
anything,
well.
yeah. And now I'm starting to realize that there's always that good and bad on both sides, and we're still trying to mingle and we're still trying to work on it. And it's not that we don't know it. We hold on to our good ones and we let go for bad ones. So we would have to grab our bad ones, let go for good ones, depending on the situations. Because at the end of the day, like that's just happens. It's just part of it. People don't want to accept it. They want to put up a completely different themselves to the social life versus who they are.
The highlight reel is what I like to
Highlight
call
reel.
it.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. So, but the thing is, at the end of the day, like if you don't forgive yourself for that, first you have to really understand. The first step I had to take to acknowledge that happened, really understand, like, okay, this is real because I'm a healthy guy. I do CrossFit 5 days a week. Like, you're not even thinking anything remotely close to a trauma. Like, this is not happening. So you have to spend that time acknowledge that, and then you have to understand like why that happened. And that why can take a long time. Fortunately for me, it took 1.5 weeks. And the reason it took me 1.5 weeks because I went to a therapist and she kept asking me questions and questions and questions and questions. And eventually I got to the bottom. Eventually it was on surface level. And then you stop asking really the deep, and you have to analyze each steps too, right? Because now it's easy for me to say what was surface level. Back then it was not. When I was at the same surface as the problem, it was not a surface level problem. For me, it was a big problem. When I started separating myself from the problem, then I started seeing it as like, oh, it's separate from me. And then I started stacking it up.
Yeah, so what you're saying is this situation has nothing to do with me.
And that's when I realized because a lot of sexual abuse survivors, including emotional, any abuse survivors, they majority of them blame themselves.
The thought of not making it about me, that's a hard pill to swallow. Your
Hmm.
whole emotional trauma is around why did that just happen to me?
Hmm.
So it's hard to remove yourself from that situation and think, okay, maybe it's nothing to do with me.
It's not about it. It's not about me. Of course, it's about me because I actually went through it. And what I'm saying is, you have to really acknowledge it, the trauma, grieve that, and the way you grieve it, you just don't ask why did they do it? Why did it happen to me? You have to really put on the why and not the did. Because did is done. It's gone in the past. It happened. Yes, acknowledge it. But that big why is where you need to find that answer because most of the time that pain will lead to your purpose.
Mm.
And you went through it for a purpose. It's not pleasant. It's not anything that anyone wish upon someone else, but it's already done. You can either live in that what's been done and then that did part of it and live rest of your life being a victim of that situation versus you take it, you understand that yes, it happened to you. You give yourself that love, that time, that grieving time, but you also tell yourself that with my pain, I'm going to serve others. And at the end of the day, when you give, you're going to start filling up too.
It sounds like when you use your pain to start serving others to help them, it's going to make up for all that pain that
You build a community, you build a network, even if you don't know them in person, through one story or your story, you build such a web of similar patterns that would have gone wrong or worse. And then you're just now here, everyone connected because everyone is connected by 6 degrees of freedom behind it.
no, 6 degrees of separation.
Separation. Yes. Yeah.
It's the whole premise of LinkedIn.
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah,
I mean, I
it
read
is.
somewhere, I'm like, and I wrote it down. I'm like,
That's
okay,
their whole
I gotta,
business
I gotta,
model.
I gotta
That's why
research
you
on that.
see that's why the connections are 1st degree, 2nd degree, that
Second
kinda thing.
degree. Yeah. So no, I mean, that's how I see it. It's not that about,
It's a powerful way of seeing it.
it-
It's
it's hard.
seeing the bigger meaning of it all.
It's hard. It's really hard. I'll be
Yeah, it's
honest with you.
hard. It's a lot to hold on your shoulders.
But at the same time, if you really think that all of us, you and me and anyone you interact with, even our kids, from my son, we have two. As human beings, we have two things going on with us. One is ego, one is heart. Our ego is always here to protect us. Our ego works with our brain like it's like, "No, I'm not letting you go." And it's a good thing. It's needed,
It
but
gets
then
us
you also
far in life, but it also holds us back in some areas.
but you also need this. You need to have that sync.
Well, with the ego comes the competitiveness, the
Mhm.
achievement, the reason to really do anything.
Yeah. So that's where you need to be. I think where everyone needs to be aware of, like, there's this like ego part of it. Like, yes, I am the victim, and ego also can be very negative. All right, like
100%.
I want to be the victim in this case because ego choose what is serving that purpose.
Exactly. A lot of the times choosing the victim mentality
Is
serves you
working.
more.
So then ego would be like, I'll be the victim in this case. And they're like, oh, okay. So I think like that's where you need to be careful about. And at the end of the day, if you really want to move, you have to forgive. I mean, there's no other. I don't want you to forget. Don't forget it. Forgetting means you didn't learn anything. You
That's
have
a
to
good
remember
point.
that. I mean, if I forgot about it, like, no, no, no.
And
But
it
that's
also
where
means you haven't dealt with it maybe if you
that's where a
forget
lot
it.
of that's what a lot of people think. Actually, it's the other way around. A lot of people think like, uh, "Oh, you're still talking about it. You haven't forgotten it." Like, no, no, no. I'm ahead because I haven't forgotten it.
You're actually working through it and
Because I
thinking
know
about it and feeling all those
it's
emotions
there.
again and grieving it.
Yep. So there's some of these things that people are all over the place in terms of like how they see the cause and effect. How I can see a cause and effect in a situation can be completely different from your standpoint. Basically, what I'm saying is like understanding the basics of it, the foundational, like, okay, you have an ego and a heart, really relate to your heart, and then understand from your ego what needs to be learned and work in sync.
Have you read Ryan Holiday's Ego is the Enemy?
Ego is the enemy, the obstacle is the way, everything.
So I have that one. I started it a couple months ago and then I switched to a different book, but I will go back to that.
I'm literally man crushing on him. I'm like, he will be on my podcast. That's my visualization. That
The big aspiration,
there
that's
you
when
go.
you know
That's it.
you've made it.
That's it. Yeah. That's right. That's right.
Bring back to the 6 degrees of separation because now that we know each other, you just open yourself to my entire network of 6 degrees. Well, for all I know, I could be 3 degree to Ryan Holiday, so maybe you're 4. We don't know.
Mm.
The world is smaller than you think. What do you think are some of the long-term effects from childhood trauma? You had it as a child, so many others, and can you pinpoint any parts of your life that you're like, "Ooh, that might stem from that?"
Yes. So I think like depending on the trauma, it's different. But for me, I can pinpoint a few things. I was very much about being the nice guy, right? And it's not wanting to be the nice guy. I really meant to be the nice guy versus, oh yeah, I'm a bad guy. Let's go and, do all that thing that we do in our 20s and early 30s or whatever. And the reason for that is when you're yourself, you start respecting other people's bodies. And so there's two ways to go about it. Some people go on the completely on the negative and they don't respect anyone's body because they feel like they have to take revenge now and they have to do all that stuff. And that's where ego comes in.
Almost like I'm owed something.
That's it. Yeah. Now I want to be that guy. And again, I'm talking from the man's perspective, by the way. You understand how you felt and you don't want anyone else to feel that way. Now you get ridiculed, you get insulted in different ways. Like there'll always be haters, no matter you're gonna be good or bad. On both sides of the aisle, there are always gonna be haters. So it doesn't matter. But long-term effect, yes, for me, it was that a lot of emotional shutdown. I managed to dealt with it. Very fortunate, and I'm also gonna tell you this. I'm grateful about it that it opened up before I turned 40 because I think a lot of it depends on how you see things and just connect things. It's not about, oh, I don't want to do that. It's not about you're taking away anything from yourself or your grief. All you're saying is, I can move on and that grief can stay and I can actually grieve it my way versus an external thing constantly really pulling back to the same position. So you can kind of take a step ahead of the grief. That's how I took it. That's how I did it. That it happened already. Now I'm grieving. So let's focus on this grieving that I'm grieving now. Yes, I forgave the rest of them and move on. So every time it comes up, I already know that I'm not going back to forgiving the other persons because I already forgiven them. I'm still have the grief to fall back on to say, yes, I understand. I'm still giving you attention. What do you need? And really, most of the time I do for me is meditation. I really kind of just let go.
Did you start with any kind of app or program to start meditation?
No, I think like I just did like basic yoga meditation. And of course, there's like all fancy names. Of course, I'm from India. So growing up with yoga and all like,
Yeah, you guys are
so OG yogis, right? So all of them now has a specific term, English and all that. So, but anyway, I do what everyone knows famous for is 4-7-8 breathing. Like you inhale for 4 seconds, hold it for seven and let it go for 8 seconds.
Okay, so you breathe in for 4, hold it for 4, release for
No,
4,
no, no.
and then you do
Okay, we're gonna just count four. We're gonna breathe in and you hold it for seven and you let go for eight. So
that does wonders.
you do that several times. And of
Mm.
course, now it's like 4-7-8, just like a yoga thing. But it's really, you're worshiping the sun. That's just how it is. The old days, that's how they will worship the sun.
Why 478? Like, why those seconds? Do you know anything
I
about
have
that?
zero idea about that. Now
Okay.
I have to research that. Level stops right here.
The
Level,
beginner Inoki?
yeah, level two. No, no. But I bet there are reasons. I can
Mm.
guarantee you that. They're the best thing I heard. What is it like? Western culture have turned yoga into workouts. Was the style of like lifestyle for East Indian or Asian. And everyday breathing exercises or like doing stuff that you would normally do and sit on the floor and eat, and that becomes an asana because you're gonna sit down on the floor, cross your legs, and eat. Because back in there was no table culture and all that.
Very
Yeah,
much an everyday
yeah,
thing in your life.
yeah.
I love that aspect of other cultures. I like sitting on the floor. I feel a lot more grounded. Sometimes I feel I don't wanna say I'm not anxious, but just, like, not connected. I'll get off the couch or, like, even off my bed, I'll just, like, sit on the floor. And there's something about it where it's more grounding.
It's grounding. It's grounding, right? Like because I do that. I go to the park nearby and just take my flip flops off.
The
Fun.
key is, though, if you're in a park, do you do this? You have to take off your shoes and your socks. You have to be
Mhm.
barefoot
Yes,
in
yes.
a park. You will not feel the effect of
No,
grass and nature unless you're
yes.
barefoot.
I tell people I used to run sprints and all, like all barefoot, play soccer in school. Back in India, I'm a nature guy and I feel like technology is good. I'm an engineer myself, but nature really brings you home.
Yeah, I get that. Bringing us back to the topic, why do you think it's so difficult for men to ask for help and speak up about anything that's going wrong in their lives?
Ego. I mean, I hate to say this. I'm gonna be straight up honest about it. Like I know I get flack for it from men, and I don't give a two shits about that. People are people, and I will have my the way I feel. Is I think like we have created a culture where it's it's all about the ego, and I feel like patriarchal society have created a lot of rules back in the day, and based on stuff that were legit back in the day. That means like, yes, men were hunters, women are gatherers. Yes, men would go and hunt for fish and food, whatever. I probably won't even survive in the forest a day. So talk about being a man. But the thing is, majority of us would. And the reason is things have changed. Now it's not about that. The evolution have give us that opportunity and our own reality to have a system where we can really be human. But the problem is we're still holding on to our old selves or our own ego, what serves us. Let go of the stuff that don't serve us. And then we are also creating a legacy of what negative that serve us be ruling point for our future. And that's that's where it is. It's like, okay, so you guys definitely don't want to go back to horse ride days. because we are building cars. We have cars and we have,
I don't wanna ride horses now,
right,
Rish, let
right.
alone all the time.
Look at that. But you won't have an option back in the day. Won't. Now you will walk. Okay, let's take that. Walk or horse ride or anything over car, right? Because that is serving us. It's good. It helped us. It's a positive movement. Let's talk about women. They used to be the house bearers and gatherers and child rearers, right? Oh, they're going to be CEO. We have a problem.
Ends.
So now you're bringing the negative of that to suit your current situation. So that's exactly what I meant. We kept the ego that hold us negatively, and we need to let that go because we have created this patriarchal society to be the light bearer. But the problem is we have created a bomb that's not even ticking anymore. It's gone. It's blew off. And we can see that in the numbers. 70% of the world's suicide are men. And out of that men, I don't remember the numbers. I was trying to download this paper where it broke down the percentage of like men by ages. And I don't even want to look at that numbers. I'm scared. But I will, and you will see me talking about that in my podcast soon. But what I'm saying is like this is the problem. We have created like, oh, we gotta be saving the world. Don't worry, women, we are coming. And then we haven't given enough attention to the human side of men. And now our boys and men are dying. We keep saying man up, man up, man up. And all we are seeing is man down, man down, man down constantly, either with mental health, addiction, suicide, mass shootings. All the shooters, by the way, are men. We want to be the flag bearers of the world. I don't think we are doing a pretty good job about that.
What has to change for that to change?
Then you need to acknowledge what the problem is. You need to acknowledge what kind of masks are we wearing with everyone, and what mask needs to change without being judged. And we need a safe space. Like you need a safe space. The problem is the other side of it, I feel like, is both has to be open, men and women, because nowadays in a social status, like we're so polarized, I feel. Anything you talk about men is against women. Anything you talk about women is against men. But the problem is we're forgetting that we are not about men or women. It's about men and women. We both fit the puzzle. That's how this whole web is. And we just need to understand that if we are complaining as women, toxic masculinity, let's define those. And if your men are willing to work on those and showing up vulnerably, say no to that. You cannot ridicule them. You cannot make fun of them. You cannot insult them because that's what you wanted. Now, if you have someone who is really having hard time controlling their emotions, that might be a medical issues. That's a completely different situation. That means they haven't handled themselves well. So yes, but if your partner comes to you and just sit down and say, "Hey, babe, I had a hard day today," and they want to talk to you, don't be scared or don't be surprised. Your gut reaction would be like, "Oh, what?" Because normally men would be like, "Hey, babe, how's it? Oh, we're good. Let's grab a beer," right? But then if there's a man who's really working on it, you'd be like, "You know what? Yeah, I just want to chill and talk to you." Give that space. And you will see, you will get that from once you give that listening ears, you'll create that safe space for him. And you also get that safe space of your divine feminine energy to come in that space. And that's what it is. And then you will see the masculine energy also grows tenfolds because now that they got that safe space, you also are getting your macho guy back. And that's where also women also needs to understand like asking men to be vulnerable and be emotional doesn't mean like they are not falling off the wagon of being macho. So you also have to give that. So I think like that's where a lot of men are afraid and scared to be like, I don't know how my spouse would think. I don't know what my family would think. And this is exactly why they don't open up. So to give that safe space is very, very important. And that's why having a good tight knit community of men around family and friends is very important. I feel like where they don't just talk about shallow stuff, that really, really kind of talk about like deep stuff and about like being there for each other and not just for each other, also their extended families.
So, what I'm hearing is two parts. If you're in a man woman relationship as a woman, toxic masculinity, there is room for us to help there and help our significant others or men in our life to work through that. But we have to speak up about it in not such a reactive, aggressive type of way. And then the other thing I'm hearing is men need to take a good hard look at their immediate circle of friends. If all they want to talk about is a shallow thing and push down the feelings, these friends of theirs are never going to save or open space for what they want to talk about,
Yep.
right?
Yep. That's where you got to expand, right? Like sometimes you have to understand to break through that comfort zone of yours, you're going to start having a new circle. So sometimes you just have to break the old circle completely. Sometimes you just can leave the old circle by themselves and create a new circle, completely different. But don't be afraid to do it.
Within all of the work that do you, I'm sure you do, but do you have any people that you work with that are dads
Hmm.
of daughters and learning how to man up? There's a lot of dads that have a wife and 3 girls, and it's just nothing but female energy. So, I mean, that should be easy for them to tune into their feelings, but what do you think?
I think it comes down to gender role, and I am a huge proponent of not labeling stuff. Of course, there's boy and girl. Yes, I understand that, and there's specific things, and but the role as a parent is still a parent. I cannot be labeled. So I think tapping into that, it's I personally feel it'll be fun because that's asking you straight up to man up and show what you do. And I feel like the way you do it is you do what your daughter wants to do. She wants to tea parties. Let's do it. She play with Barbie doll. Yes. She wants to go to Disney and watch Frozen. Yeah, do it. That's what it takes because it's not about what you're doing. It's about who you're doing and how you're feeling doing it. And I feel like being a parent, I mean, you just can't, um, it doesn't matter. There's,
No rules anymore.
yeah. And that's how awesome is that?
I mean, that's one of the joys of having kids where you get to be a kid again.
And then you have an excuse like, oh, it's not me, it's my kid.
And you also have excuse to stay home and just hang out
I,
and play.
I do that all the time.
Talk to me about some of the people that you coach and some of the people that you have on your podcast. What are some themes that you're hearing around this whole stigma of man up?
I think like it's a long way to go. I think that's the first thing that comes to my mind. It's a long way to go, but it also gives me a lot of hope over the last 8, 9 months. And this is an 18 months project for me since I really launched it. And I launched really in July, but I was so scared to launch it and even talk about it. I'm like, oh my God, people will think this is a pro men platform and I'm going against women. So there's all that thought process, right? Because you're just talking to yourself and we probably are the worst talker to ourselves. I mean, we won't even talk to our best friends or talk to our friends like that. Not even friends, talk to our enemies like that. I think we talk to us the worst. Anyway, so once I opened it up, I was surprised at the amount of encouragement that I got. And it's not even about encouragement. I think amount of stories that came to me that Rish, this is something that needs to be talked about, men and women. And that's when I realized, like, okay, yeah, this is something that has to be done. Now, so far with my interviews, I will tell you, all of them had been through trials and tribulations, had overcome and came on the other side. And men and women, I interviewed a couple of my friends who had been through domestic abuse and their male partners. And what really want to talk about is if you do not take control and if you do not really have an understanding of emotions and communicate properly, you're gonna bleed that thing to your partners or to your kids or whatnot. So you have to work on that. I think two big things that came to me so far doing my podcast is, and I always repeat that, whoever is listening to your podcast or my podcast or whoever is going through tough times, you're not alone. And being absolutely blunt about it, don't think you're special. There are people who had gone through it. So don't bask in the glory of victimhood, basically, that, oh, I'm special and I'm the only one who went through this problem. No, reach out. Reach out and you will see there are people who went through this same way you are suffering and they have found a way, and then you will find a solution. Uh, If you try to do it all by yourself, then you will struggle. So learn from everyone's successes, learn from everyone's failures, and that's how you learn. But that's kind of a theme that I've noticed within the guests that I have spoken to, and this whole man up stigma that everyone have suffered, either the men or the women on both sides. And of course, the men I've interviewed, they have suffered and then they have gone out and they have actually worked on themselves and came out on the other side. And for the women, unfortunately, of course, they're the survivors. If you don't work on it, then you lead that to someone else.
Rish, what can we do to create space for the men in our lives that are going through tough times and don't have the courage to speak up about it?
When you talk about space, don't make it just a word. I'm giving you space. Really make it physical, and I'm giving you space. And understand your partners or understand the men in your life and understand the kids in your life. What's that definition of space looks to them. For me, my space is like, I want to hug my partner. For some men, that can be give me space, give me a couple of days by myself. For some, just give me a couple of days with my parents or my kids or with my dogs, whatever. I understand their spaces and give them that space. Because you have to understand, like, it will take a lot for men to speak up. So we have to kind of be there and give that space and give that nudge, as I if I say so, to not get the whole thing, but even just one step. So as partners, you can say to your partner that I know you're going through rough times and I know you want to open up. How about if anything you want to talk about tonight, just one thing, even if it's just for 30 seconds, or even if it's not nothing, but you want to say something. What do you want to say? So what you're giving, you're kind of opening them up to the space that they start feeling comfortable, even with small things.
And they may not say something the first time, but just continuously saying, "Is there anything you want to talk
Mhm.
about?" Or "I'm open to listening." And eventually they might come out of their shell a bit.
Right. One other thing is you also have to understand, like, person to person, you need to understand and you need to give them the space and freedom to tell them, like, hey, don't take this as a nagging, but I'm here for you when you're ready to talk. Give them a couple of days. This is like, okay, do you want to talk? They said no, okay. So sometimes you just have to do that. And that's one way to open up. And then there are people who don't, who just don't open up at all. But I will be absolutely honest. So far, what I had seen, if you're really honest about giving safe space to your men, unless that man is cheating on you already and don't really care about you, that doesn't count in
There's no
my
space for them.
experience. No, exactly. That's probably the best way to do it. Say it. Then you can always see, like, they would come back to you. They will be like, once they get that safe space for small stuff, women understand that. Like, okay, yep, I give it that safe space, and then the men will react like, okay. But at the same point, you also have to understand, like, you cannot judge, right? Like, you really have to be absolutely open minded about it. And it cannot. It just. It's not about your partner. It can be your
I think women have a hard time with that. We want our men to open up, but then we want them to be macho time.
right? And that's exactly what I'm saying. Like, that's the problem. But I feel like as long as you give that space and as long as you understand that your man and your partner can be vulnerable and emotional and can still save you, that's okay. That will come if you give that space. Because remember one thing, by default, men are protectors. That you can bring out more of a safe space and conversations.
Yeah, with everything you're doing with your podcast and the mission that you're on, what does what does mission accomplished look like for you?
Wow. You're the second person who asked me this week.
Maybe you still have some dreaming to do?
Huh. I still have a lot of dreaming to do, and my dream goes on and on and on. Trust me, I never stops. But he was my friend. I didn't answer him, but I'm on a podcast, so I will answer you a little bit. So I think like really mission accomplished would be breaking the stigma and the next generation and even our generation really inspired to level up and understand that it's okay to show your emotions and show your vulnerability and show them that in vulnerability there is strength, there's not weakness, and you can still be that guy as men or boys or young men and still feel emotions and still feel something. Then only you will have that nice balanced harmony in a society where you will see men, and this is like my dream. I'm hoping is once we understand that, then you will know like you're much more in tune with your emotions, and there will be a lot less domestic abuse and physical abuse and kids with absent fathers and all sorts of just bad things that we don't need in the world of unprocessed emotions. And so I think that that would be my dream. Men to understand basically that it's okay to be to show up in your heart space and don't be afraid to show up as you are. So
A big dream, but it's definitely achievable. Would you point men in particular to any resources that have helped you so far, such as books, websites?
definitely read the book, Louis Harris, his book, The Mask of Masculinity. That's huge. It's an amazing.
I will absolutely add that into the show notes because it's a good one.
There's a documentary I haven't watched yet. It's funny. I mean, these are all new coming to me and it's all on my radar, but I haven't got time to watch. The Mask, I think, by I forgot her first name. Last name is Newsom.
I'll find it.
It's basically California Governor Newsom's wife who did this. I want to watch that myself. I haven't. It's amazing what I heard. It's funny, similar to things that I'm working on right now. A little bit of documentary and content creation. And then, of course, I can't go without saying, please read Ego is the Enemy and Obstacle is the Way. I mean, Ryan Holiday. If there's an illustrations, I'll make my son read that too. That's so much needed because it kind of grounds you. It really does, like the way he wrote it, and it's very simplistic. And I'm a huge Stoicism fan myself, so this is why I'm always attracted to like writers like that. So,
And remind the listeners or who don't know at all what Stoicism is.
Stoicism is basically the philosophy that started in like fourth or fifth BC when all these Greek and Spanish philosophers were born, like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus. Like you guys see all these names and all these quotes. And Stoicism itself became popular in its own way as a philosophy, and but this philosophy of looking inwards and looking inside and really take life very logically, but at the same time keeping your emotions in a healthy way. So that's what stoicism is, and it's a lot to do with let go of your ego, wisdom and courage and justice and temperance. Those are the four pillars of stoicism. And Ryan Holiday, I mean, he's an amazing writer, and how he breaks it down. And Tim Ferriss is one. He did a lot of stuff too on that. So
Yeah, they're
yeah.
all good. And Lewis Howes, even just following everything he's talked about, he was a pro football player, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Right. And
Yeah.
then started talking
And
about
and he
men and
had
vulnerability and
he had sexual abuse and
and
he
addiction, right? Yep, I follow him. He's good. Rish, you mentioned you're writing a book. Let's hear about it. What's it about?
I am. It's called Man Up. It'll be a book on redefining the word man up, and it'll kind of walk you through the a journey of how this social stigma, and it's about getting really deep about how I felt it, like from my perspective, digging deeper about the social stigma and how it affected us and how as boys and young men we grew up and how it affected our life right now, and walk them through if they want to change that, what they can do with some of the process that I worked on myself. And there'll be worksheets. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited.
When's the plan to have it out? Obviously, book timelines always change, but what's the relative timeline now?
Relative timeline, I would say early next year for sure, because I'm halfway done with the book, and it's just a matter of finishing cuffs, and then getting all that formatting and all that. So.
Yeah, that's the work. Once you do the first draft, it's afterwards that's all the work probably. Rish, what else are you up to? Obviously, you have your podcast, which I will
Mhm.
absolutely put in the show notes. Rish's podcast is called Dads and Deadlifts, and it's think about the conversation we're having on steroids with other people as Rish as the interviewer instead. And Rish is fantastic as an interviewer. So his is good stuff.
So there's like a couple of things that I'm trying to do, like a super dad summit where I want to talk about like different things that you can do with your kids, and really fun things that I do. And it's not about doing things with your kids. It's about really helping dads connect with their kid through an activity, and remember that. Because the thing is, majority of it is men are so much about like money, 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 and I was there too. And you keep forgetting all these times that are passing by, and then you're 50 and 60, you're like, oh yeah, I didn't get to spend enough time. So I've created a program, and I'm trying to create this journal, and this journal will be available now pretty soon everywhere. Is it'll be like adventure ideas with kids,
That's really cool.
and you basically pick your adventure and take your kids there, and or you start collecting memories. And I feel like the reason is men are project based. So once you put that in task, and it's fun because you don't get to see any adventure until you scratch off that adventure. It's manufacturing right now. It's in the manufacturing process. The design is done. Everything is done. Yeah. Yeah. That's an overall couple of things that I'm doing.
Just a couple. Not busy. And don't you have one of those things called a 9 to 5 job too? Aren't you don't you have one of those?
I do. Yes. I do five. I'm an engineer. So yes.
Rich, to close it all off, is there anything you feel that has been left unsaid and that you want the listeners to know on any topic we've talked about today?
No, I think like, talking to your audience and what the purpose you have started and what you have told me offline, your podcast. Only thing I can tell is, from the Stoicism perspective, is I don't remember exactly the full quote, but it's beautiful, and I kind of incorporated it in my life before even I knew that quote, and now I love to use that. Is it's not about what you're learning that's teaching you; it's about love of that learning that will teach you. We learn so many things every day. It doesn't matter. And this is probably one of those you probably would listen to a podcast or listen to an episode and move on. And day after tomorrow, you will listen to something else. But really learn with purpose and intent, like every episodes of any podcast or any motivational video, any book, anything that you're doing in life, try to find, even if it's a small purpose from everyone, because you never know how everything gonna tie back together. Life is funny. That's one thing I learned about, and it's a teaching hold dearly to my heart now. So
And people definitely come into your life the moment they should, you know? The 6 degrees are getting smaller and smaller every day.
absolutely, I do agree with that. Yes.
Seriously. Well, Rish, to close it all out, I've put you on the spot tonight, and I applaud and appreciate your vulnerability tonight. You definitely emulate everything that you speak about and want more of in the world. So I appreciate that a lot.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I know my audience will want to follow you and find you afterwards. So I will tag everything in the show notes. Don't worry.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for doing this. And really, I mean, this is needed, like the message you're spreading. And I feel like every podcast is a journey of someone helping someone. And thanks for doing this. Appreciate it.